Well, good morning, everyone. We're so happy to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning. Today, we are so pleased to have Dr. Minuet Floyd joining us. Dr. Floyd is a professor of art education at the University of South Carolina School of Visual Art and Design. She is also the author of A Place to Worship: African American Camp Meetings in the Carolinas. This book covers the cultural, traditional, and the rich history of camp meetings inspired by Dr. Floyd's childhood experiences at the Carolina campgrounds. So here today to present her findings into the history of African American camp meetings locations, including Lincoln County's own Tucker's Grove Campground, I am honored to introduce Dr. Minuet Floyd.
Good morning, everyone. I will start by sharing my screen. So I would like to start by showing this image. When I, first of all, as a little girl growing up in North Carolina in Mooresville, we every fall of the year, we attended camp meeting. I have two sisters and one brother, and we just thought that it was something that everybody did. It wasn't until I was older, when I actually came back to camp meeting, that I realized it was not a part of everyone's tradition. And so it really made me curious. As I said, I grew up attending camp meeting, and as an adult, when I moved to South Carolina, my brother and his wife invited me back to Tucker's Grove. Tucker's Grove is the camp meeting ground that we attended mostly, even though my family attended about 3 or 4 camp meetings every fall. We did not own we did not have a tent on the grounds, and I'll talk more about what that is. But instead, we would go to the services and we would participate, and then we would travel back home. So back in 1996, when my brother and his wife invited me to the grounds, when I stepped out there on the grounds, I looked around and I immediately thought about when I was a young girl walking around, and everything looked exactly the same. It just seemed to be a little bit smaller. And so as I walked around, I started thinking about this important tradition and what I could do as an adult to capture this history. Camp meetings are these religious outdoor events, meetings that happen usually once a year. Some of them start as early as summertime in June, and then the latest ones that I know of end late October. So when I started my research, I was able to travel to the archives, the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and I found this image, which was published in Harper's Weekly magazine, and it shows a group of people, a group of African Americans participating in a camp meeting. And there's a long narrative that accompanied this image. It talks about someone who witnessed this event from afar, just watching the people and the way that they were acting and the way that they were participating and how they felt about that experience, basically journaling what their experience was from an outsider looking in at this event. This was another image, and at this time, some of these images are pre-photography, so you found more etchings and drawings of the of accounts that people made of these events, because there were people who participated in camp meetings who kept journals. They kept accurate journals of those events. And so this is just another image that I wanted to show. And I'll talk more about, what's going on here in some additional slides. So this is a picture that I found, and my family although we took pictures, my dad did not take a picture of us in front of any of the tents, but this is an image that I found of my brother and my sisters and my mom, and then our cousin, the lady over to the right, on my right, she is holding the bigger purse. We called her Cousin Gert. She lived by herself, and I remember that whenever we were going to any social events, that we would always go over and pick her up so that she could travel with us. This is my dad. My dad, I consider to be the instrumental person in making sure that we went to camp meeting every year. It was not something that we said, no, we don't want to go. We just did it. We knew that it was important to our parents. And so we traveled to the camp meeting grounds every year with my parents to participate. This is actually a picture that I took, I think it was around 2001 or 2 at Tucker's Grove. So, the way that camp meetings are set up is usually there is the central location of what we call the arbor or the tabernacle or the stand. And this is where, and it's the equivalent of a church. So this is where all of the preaching happens. And they're located a little bit differently on each one of the grounds. So when I started researching, I found out by word of mouth that there were camp meeting locations in South Carolina. I just thought that they were in North Carolina. And then I discovered that there were white camp meeting grounds. And that's something that I did not know until I came back to the experience back in 1996. So what I started doing was I started researching 3 camp meetings in North Carolina and 4 camp meetings in South Carolina. This is a camp welfare in South Carolina. So I started looking at the arbors, and if you look at this one, you see that there are openings all the way around. And then this is a camp meeting ground at St. Paul that takes place in October. Because of the weather changes and, it's cooler that time of the year, you will find that the arbors are usually closed in like this one. But this is an arbor that no longer exists. So a few years back, they raised money and they were able to tear the old arbor down and build a new one. So this one has been in place, I think, since around 2011 or so. But again, the new structure taking into consideration the ground with, you see the more some cinder block at the bottom of it. And then there are about 6 ways that you can enter and exit the arbor. This is another arbor. This is at Mott's Grove. And again, you can see this happens in October. So you can see that it's more of an open-sided arbor. This is Tucker's Grove. Back in 2016 or 2015, they received a Duke Endowment grant to help refurbish the arbor. And so the older arbor, and I did not have a picture here, but the older arbor was, the sides came down really low, and you had to really be careful if you entered the sides of the arbor, because you could actually bump your head, and that happened to a few people, and it was not a good experience for them. So with safety in mind, the Board of Trustees at Tucker's Grove was able to basically rebuild the arbor, but also keeping some of the wood in place that was a part of the original arbor. From what my understanding, Tucker's Grove began back in 1874. So this tradition has been going on a long time. Some of the campgrounds that I attend have had only a few instances in which they were not able to have camp meeting. And I think one was when there may have been a polio outbreak. So now, of course, fast forward to 2020 with COVID, the pandemic, that, camp meeting did not happen last year. And I have a little more to say about that towards the end of this presentation. So around the outside of the arbors, you will find that people have built tents. Now, if you remember that original the first 2 slides, where you saw a tent that was more like a pitch tent, it was a canvas tent, where people, when they came to camp meeting, they would bring canvas tents with them. They would also, some people walked to camp meeting. And if you think about it, it was that a time when people lived in isolation from one another. So coming to camp meeting was that one time a year where people had this opportunity to socialize and to experience a family reunion or spiritual renewal. People came to the campgrounds and they were very excited, and they talked about their blessings and, those things. They gave accounts of what things they had experienced, what trials or even the challenges, and then the happy times that they had experienced since camp meeting the year before. So over time, the actual tent structures, which are now still called tents, and this is at Mount Carmel, but some of the tents are still 1 level, but at this campground, they have 2 levels because of the amount of space that you can only build up instead of around, because there's limited space on the campgrounds. There's some campgrounds that have a 2nd row of tents. And of course, those people who have tents on the 2nd row aren't able to see the arbor, which is usually somewhat centrally located. So also I found out about this camp meeting ground is that sometimes two families own the two tents. So that the way that the campgrounds are set up is that the family owns the tent, but the church, which, you know, when camp meetings first started, there were no churches, but now there's usually a church somewhere nearby. And so the church owns the land, but the people who have the tents, they own the tents. And so they're responsible for taking care of them and making sure that they are up to par, that they replace old wood, that they make sure that they're safe each year prior to camp meeting beginning. So this is St. Paul, just to show you how at this camp meeting ground, you really have to look closely when you're there looking for a specific family tent, because the only way that you might be able to recognize it is by a number that is painted on the front side. Usually on the tents, you see a front porch, which is a very communal place. And the fact that camp meetings are usually shaped in the round or in a square, you are able to see all the people who are on the inside of the area. But also now they have, a lot of the campgrounds have back porches where people, when they're not on the front side of the grounds, you might find them on the back side. This is at Tucker's, but this is actually the front side as well. So each campground has a board of trustees, and the camp meeting trustees are the ones who basically come up with the rules, who say, yes, it's okay if you paint your tent. You need to get some repairs done on your tent. They make sure that people are not in any violations in terms of where they're parking. Now at Tucker's Grove, they have a bigger parking lot on the backside, and people are no longer allowed to park in front of their tents unless they are there prior to camp meeting beginning and they're unloading, or doing repairs and things like that. These are some older tents. I think some of these tents, probably some parts of them are maybe over 100 years old. So again, rebuilding, replacing wood, thinking about some people think about whether or not to replace it with cinder block. There have been some storms that have happened that have caused some people to rebuild tents, or there have been fires that have broken out on some of the camp meeting grounds that have damaged the tents. And so people have had to rebuild or repair. I also heard about, if you think about people now, modern day, bringing all of these luxury appliances that we have to the camp meeting grounds, that can overheat the system and that can cause fires. But now more camp meeting grounds are providing tents with their individual electricity, instead of it being a line of tents that are all connected to one another. But still, you have to be very, very careful, just because the tents are located so close to one another. So just moving forward to what happens on the inside of the ground and under the tents, under the arbor. This is an image, Mr. Shell Johnson, they called him Mr. Shelley. He was the horn blower at one of the camp meeting grounds in South Carolina, and he blew this horn. It's actually a part of a pipe from an organ, and it was, I guess, altered so that he would be able to blow it, and it made a horn sound. And so he learned to blow this horn. And I'm fortunate that I had an opportunity to talk with him over the years when he was alive. And he talked about the fact that he wanted someone else to take over, but he was afraid that no one else wanted to learn how to blow the horn. So he continued to blow it. And interesting thing about him is that he blew this horn at the Black camp meeting ground and also at one of the white meeting campgrounds that took place the week before. So here's a short video clip just to hear the sound.
Yeah. Okay.
So Mr. Shell lived to be 107 years old. And after he stopped blowing the horn, his nephew, Mr. Bowman, continued that tradition until his death about 2-3 years ago. So now they're actually looking for a younger person to step up to take on this tradition of blowing the horn at the campground. And it's not an easy thing to do, but I've learned so much about the tradition and the fact that with this horn, it's that time that it means it's time to come to the service under the arbor. And they also have speakers on the outside of this arbor. You can see that this is one that happens later in the year, so it's closed in on all sides. But with the speakers, you're able to hear the service, even if you're sitting on your front porch. At some of the camp meeting grounds, again, this is at Camp Welfare, they have a missionary service where some of the missionary women and men from some of the local campgrounds march down to the camp meeting arbor, and they have a service on a Saturday. Here's another example. They usually march around the grounds at Tucker's Grove, and I don't have this image in here. Usually prior to camp meeting started, there's something called the blessing of the grounds, where people meet and the camp participants meet, and they march around the grounds singing songs, and one of the pastors will sprinkle water or some sort of oil around the grounds, basically blessing the grounds prior to camp meeting starting. This is a pastor that really, he was a host pastor at St. Paul for many, many years. Again, this is the older arbor structure photograph that I took back in 2006. So as I took my photographs, I realized also the importance of capturing the history, the spirit, the food, the vernacular architecture, and just getting firsthand accounts from people and some of the elders who participated in camp meeting, because, since they were older, I wanted to get their voices, capture their voices first. So I was also interested in women who also led some of the services under the arbor. This is Reverend Kerr, who came down from Virginia. He grew up out at Tucker's Grove. And when he came back in 2014, there were so many people there to hear him preach. But also he spoke about the fact that he remembered that when he was on those grounds as a little boy, there was really only standing room only under the arbor. And when you were walking around the campgrounds, because they were so crowded, you would bump into people. But nowadays, certainly with modern technology, we don't see that happen as much. Now, when people come to the camp meetings, yes, some family members do spend the night on the grounds. Usually, camp meetings can last from about 3 days to about a week. But some family members who are really passionate about the tradition, they might come out earlier. I know one woman who starts camping out about 2 weeks prior to her camp meeting starting, just because she loves it so much. So she's called the camp meeting queen. Usually when the pastors come out to preach on the grounds, they set up a schedule for the week. And so the congregations from the churches will know who is preaching on each, usually starting around Wednesday night through Sunday being called Big Sunday, as the day when it's the final day of services. And there are usually a lot of people out at the grounds on those days. So over the years, since I started doing working on my photo documentary and finding out more research and information from families, I've seen the number of people decrease. And again, some of it depends on the day of the week. And then thinking about technology in terms of now I can drive to the campground and I can go home the same day. Whereas a long time ago, people, when they came to camp meetings, they came and they had to stay. They brought chickens, they brought live chickens with them. They came in a horse and buggy, or as I mentioned earlier, they walked to the grounds. And so there would be people who would come through the campground selling things that they would need, such as the ice man or the sweet potato man with all these vegetables that you could buy right there on the grounds. But back to this slide, this is one of the choirs who would come out to the campground with their pastor to sing. And usually when this group, this choir came out to Mount Carmel, that really there was still only standing room only under the arbor, just because people love to hear them sing. Nowadays also, the camp meetings ground is made up of more than one church. So you'll find several churches who come out and participate. And this is just one choir that I'll just share a brief clip, just so that you can hear some of the singing that happens under the ground, on the grounds, under the arbor. Okay, so I'll stop it right there. But again, when certain choirs came out, they would also bring a lot of their church members and family members. And so you would automatically have more people in attendance, but also visitors. Sometimes there are visitors who come out to have a meal with a family. They're invited to have a meal with a family. So you might see them on the grounds. This is, I call her Mama Rigby, Miss Allen Rigby. She is an ancestor of a man who actually founded this grounds, who basically was responsible for Shady Grove Camp Meeting being in existence. The story is that there was a big storm coming up, and there were the rice field, the harvest needed to be collected, and so there were some newly freed men who were walking around, and so this man asked if they would help with the rice, that he would give them this land that could be used for religious purposes. So the way that all of the campgrounds that I've been researching basically originated is by purchasing the land or the land being donated, and it's stipulated that it can only be used for religious purposes only. So Mama Rigby, she was also considered the historian at their campground. She passed away in early, I think October of 2020. And so, unfortunately, that was during COVID times. And so I did attend her funeral, which was a graveside funeral. And because of COVID in 2020 starting and, camp meeting being canceled, a lot of her family decided to have the hearse and they drove through the campground so that she would basically have that opportunity to be on the campground one last time prior to her funeral. This is at Tucker's Grove, with the collection tray and then blessing the collection. And you can see that they have on different colors of t-shirts, and usually that's based on the different church that you attend. So the camp meeting participants, they're able to identify which church the person who is wearing the shirt is from. And these are a couple of photos. The next few photos are some that I took over time at Tucker's Grove. This was a handmade sign that basically the Board of Trustees put up so that you could see, no display of public drunkenness, no disruptive behaviors, no loud music, loud mufflers, motorcycles, water guns, cap guns, fighting or poppers. Violators will be arrested. And, if you think about over time with people out in these rural areas where people gathered, lots of people gathered, that sometimes things would happen that would be disruptive or would cause, sometimes harm to another person. And so they put up these signs just as reminders. Here's the more, this sign was put up a few years later, but this one, this is a more of a commercially made sign with the same information on it. Just reminders to people that you have to, that there are rules in place and you need to be considerate of those rules. And so you can see if you notice that tent that was beside the sign, and now the family of that who owns that tent decided to, basically tear the old tent down and build a new one. So each year for camp meeting, you see the changes and the upgrades that campers have made, or camp participants have made to their tents. And here's just showing you another angle of another grouping of tents. There are 3 that are connected. And so at some point, the families in those 3 tents decided that they would all rebuild. And so you can see how they use the same builder. And by builder, I mean, it could be family members who built these tents. They get together and, pool their resources, and they repair and rebuild. So just to show you how over time you see these changes that happens. And this is inside of one of the tents, just to show you that most people, they bring old furniture and appliances and things from their houses out to the campground. So they basically repurpose those things that they have at home, and they give their tents more of a feel of more of a homey feel. Whereas, you can imagine years ago, the floors in the tents were pine straw, not pine, they could have been sawdust or sand. And you can see some of these new modern day changes that have happened with the tents, but you see the fans inside because there's no air conditioner. Some tents don't have indoor toilets. There's still a lot of the tents that just have outdoor toilets or portable toilets, and I'll show that to you in just a minute. Some families, they put up pictures of family members. I have one friend, she also puts up pictures of the family pets in the tent in the kitchen. And these are 2 women I met at a camp meeting. This was the first year that they were able to have their own tent, and so they were just excited to be able to have their tent on the grounds. Another lady I met, she was showing me around her tent, and she explained that there's some parts of the tent that are definitely over 100 and some years old, just because, her grandfather is the one who built the tent for their family. And usually the tradition is you pass the tents down from generation to generation. At one camp meeting, they have these portable trailers instead of tents. So this is, to me, I consider this a modern technology. They probably pay for that space to park their trailer, and then they move it at the end of camp meeting. And this is just to show you, you still see 2 of the old traditional outdoor toilets, and then you see the more modern portable toilets that are brought out to the grounds prior to camp meeting starting. But when I first started my documentary, I was able to see the old toilets, the old outdoor toilets. They basically surrounded the backside of the grounds. And so they also circled around the grounds. And so people would, they have their numbers on the tent. The 75 is also the number of the actual tent, so that people would know that toilet belongs to that family. This man, Mr. Garner, he is instrumental in building this I call it a sophisticated stove on the grounds at a couple of the campgrounds down in the Low Country. And he uses this this drum from an ice bin, and he basically builds the bricks around it. So this stove has a dual purpose of heating the tent, but also cooking the food. And it's you put wood in it for cooking. This is to show you the top of one of those stoves where you just see lots and lots of pots. Family members cook on the grounds, or they may cook at home and bring the food to the grounds. So at some of the camp meetings that I attend down in the Low Country, I do see more cooking happening on the grounds, but they divide up the responsibilities of the family members. And so that, okay, I'm bringing the greens, the collard greens, or I'm bringing the sweet potato pies, or you're responsible for the rutabagas. So everyone knows their specific role. They also know their role in terms of opening up the tent each year, cleaning it out, getting it ready, unpackaging the pots and pans, pulling everything out of plastic bags, and just fumigating, getting ready for camp meeting each year. This lady cooking a pot of rutabagas, she was just lifting up the top for me to see her rutabagas. And then other traditions, doing more cookouts and using the grills out on the grounds. This man's tradition was cooking a hog on the grounds. And then there's that tradition of there's a concession stand area usually associated with each camp meeting ground. The food is a major part of camp meeting, but also this concession stand area is a more communal place as well. And of course, it attracts the younger children. And this is Mrs. Emma Sloan at Tucker's Grove. She had this stand when I was a little girl coming out to camp meeting. And I remember her when I first came out there as an adult. And I was just amazed that, she still had her stand and she still made these snow cones and also sold popcorn. But and when I had an opportunity to talk with her, she said that she wanted to make sure that she did not increase the cost of her snow cones over the years. So they started out as 10 cents and now they are $1. And so her plan was not to increase that cost at all. Now she retired from camp meeting from, having her stand a few years ago. And I just actually sent a text to a friend this morning from the campground at Tucker's to ask if they have any updates on her and how she's doing. But she was a fixture on that campground for a very long time. And then in contrast to some of the camp meeting grounds where they have indoor running water, they have plumbing inside, at this campground, they have a couple of faucets around the grounds where you take your container and fill it up with water, or you come outside and wash some of your dishes and go back to your arbor. And to your tent. And I was just thinking about what an experience this was for these two young girls who I took this photo some years back. So these girls are probably in college now. But just that experience of feeling and seeing how, seeing how it felt to be responsible for washing your dishes outside instead of having your indoor plumbing. People, especially the older generation, when they come to camp meeting, they dress. This was on Big Sunday, and if I had not converted this image to black and white, you would see the bright colors, everything matching, hats matching shoes matching the suits. But these women were walking around just, talking to family members and friends that they hadn't seen since they were last there the year before. Some of these ladies live in Florida and they commute back to camp meeting every year. And you'll find that if you were to go through the parking lot on the campgrounds with the people who drive their cars to the grounds, that you'll see cars from Georgia, from New Orleans, from different places, from Louisiana. But you see people, they plan their vacations around coming back for camp meeting. And it's just a big part of who they are. One of my friends on the campground just says that, it's just in her DNA to attend camp meeting. This lady, Miss Benson, she was about 88 years old when I took this photo of her. She's deceased now, but she said she could only remember about 3 years not coming to the camp meeting grounds. And we didn't go into detail at that time in terms of what was going on, but most people, they were committed to coming to camp meeting. I met one man who he had just gotten out of the hospital and he was out at the campground. He still had like the air tubes in his nose, and he just knew that he had to come to camp meeting. So his children brought him out there. Miss Cora Potts, this was I believe it was her 94th birthday party that happened on the St. Paul's camp meeting grounds. And she was sitting there holding these flowers. And so I took a couple photos of she and her family, and then she with her holding one of her probably great grandchildren. And then later learning that was her last year on the camp meeting grounds, that she passed away, before the next camp meeting took place. So one of the experiences that I've had is, taking pictures of people over time, getting to know families, becoming parts of families. People would see me with my backpack and wonder if I was working for the newspaper because they were curious about what I was doing and why I had a camera. And then when they learned that I grew up in the tradition of camp meeting, they were very, very inviting. They, welcomed me. They gave me as much information they could. I started looking and asking for old photos of families on the campground. So that's something that I'm still continuing to do. I found that this research for me has become lifelong, that I don't think I'll ever finish collecting information. This man, you can see more of how the campground circles And if you were to be able to see the middle, you would see the arbor in the middle. But this man was responsible for cooking deer and cooking breakfast. That was a tradition for him on the camp meeting ground. And unfortunately, he is also deceased. These men always came out, playing. This was their pastime of playing checkers on the grounds. This man, he is an elder of a church out of New York, but he grew up going to camp meeting at Mackenzie's Grove in North Carolina. This was the year that he brought his young daughters for the first time to the camp meeting ground. So just providing them and them being able to experience camp meeting. And if you look over his head, you see that light bulb. That's one of the things that just happened in some of the photos that I took, or, I realized that the importance of the light shining bright. And there's in several photos, there's that evidence of the light, and I would think about that song, "This Little Light of Mine, I'm Going to Let It Shine." And so I'm always, now I go back and look at my photos and look for the evidence of light. This is a photo, I took this probably in 2000, 2001, of what, you see young children on the grounds. You see them playing the more traditional games. You see them throwing pine cones or turning cartwheels. So it's just great to see children put the technology down, the cell phones down, and you see them doing things that children used to do out on the grounds, because it's a very inviting place and they can run around. It's safe for them to be in that inside circle and get to know new friends. And for children at a very young age, you come to camp meeting, and I can say this was a part of my experience, is that when I was a little girl, my dad probably held me up like this under the arbor, because it was just important for us to know that this is a tradition and it's a part of who we are. And it's very, very important. And he wanted us to carry that tradition on. So with this little girl, although she's asleep, she knows the importance of camp meeting. Now she could be 18 years old now, but this tradition will be a part of her family and her children that will continue. So I always say that, people grow up in camp meeting, and not everyone will come under the arbor. Some people are there, it's more about family reunion, or for some people, it's more about spiritual renewal and coming under the arbor and getting blessings that way. But I always say that there's something about aging, is that, you might grow up in a tradition, but then you grow into it as an adult. And I feel that that is one of the things that happens. And that's why these traditions have continued to happen, is because people, they realize the importance of it. They realize that, my parents brought me here, so there must be something to this. So as they grow up, they continue that tradition. Usually camp meetings are not widely advertised. They're usually just advertised within that small community, but people know. They will say, "Oh, camp meeting is, starts the third Sunday in August." So people know when it's the time for camp meeting. And that's why some family members, they schedule their vacations around camp meeting so that they can come back and have that time with their family and with their friends, and they can bring the grandchildren home so that they can introduce them to the family. This is at Mott's Grove. Randy Ross, he is actually my sister-in-law's brother. This was a year when he brought his daughter, Raven. She was out there when she was a little younger. She came to the camp meeting ground, but, he's walking her around these grounds and he's showing her how important this tradition is. And so as I think more about camp meeting and what I wanted to know want future generations to know, I want to start with the younger generation, because they are the ones who will continue this tradition. Now, this is Raven. She may have been about 12 on this photograph, but now she is in high school, and she's here with her little cousin who came down from Denver, Colorado at the time, and he's fascinated by the ground and the playing in the dirt. And those are some of the things that we did on the campground. But it's just there's something about being in the open air, and something about having that, smelling this fresh air. And, some people treat their tents like vacation spots. It's their place away from home. It's where they come and they have that opportunity to take a deep breath. They don't have to worry about they plan around going to work. Or a long time ago, people when they had that time off, that layover, not having to worry about harvesting the crops, they had that time where they could come to the campground and have that vacation. So for many people a long time ago, this was their vacation. It was their time that they would have that break where they could come and commune with nature, commune with family and friends, and just listen to the word of God. And these, would listen to the preachers, or a long time ago, the circuit preachers who would travel by horse from campground to campground and experience this tradition. I look for, in some of my research, I look for the presence of Black people in some of the books and some of the articles that I read about camp meetings as they happened a long time ago. And, I read that there were, the enslaved people were able to go to camp meeting with the masters, and they would sometimes have to stand at the front of the arbor, or they would sit separated from the other people who attended camp meeting. But then at some point, there were people who were able to have their own camp meeting. So sometimes Black people were able to have their own camp meeting on the other side of the grounds. And I did hear that, and I've learned that was a part of Tucker's Grove. A part of the history is that when Tucker's Grove started, it was on another camp meeting ground, even though it wasn't called Tucker's Grove at the time. But at some point on that ground, at that camp meeting, there was a divide where they then had an arbor for Black people and an arbor for white people. And then eventually Tucker's Grove moved on to their own location where they're still now. But again, this is not Tucker's Grove, this is at Mott's Grove. But this is the last slide that I have to share with you. So I will stop sharing. I also like to thank everyone for coming out, and thank you to everyone that I recognize. It's exciting to see people that I know or people that I've met and have gotten to know over the last year or so. So just to let you know that my research continues. I would like to do more with video now, because I would like to capture more of the music of the camp meeting. So just know that hopefully something more will be coming in the near future.